The baby cooed like wind chimes in a soft room, and every gentle sound made the air thinner until breathing felt like confessing to a priest who knew the truth before the sinner spoke. The floral sofa under Clara's legs looked like a garden where all the flowers had died under frost. The pattern was cheerful, but the colors felt wrong, loud, obscene, splashing remembrance over a carpet that had heard birthday songs and apologies and the slow sighs of forgiveness. My mother adjusted her grip on Leo, his cheeks warm against her arm, the same way she'd held me when I was feverish. Now her fingers trembled as if the fever belonged to the house itself. Clara tilted toward him, toward our boy, her voice laced with honey that couldn't hide the thorn. "Look at our little man," she said, and the word "our" was not a word but a blade made of syllables, a sharp, ordinary cruelty in a place that had once been sacred. Her eyes glistened in a way that had always moved me. Now they felt like actors' lights trained on a stage where the script had been switched. She reached out for Leo's downy hair, and a softness brushed his crown, and something inside my chest cracked with a quiet like porcelain under pressure. We were all gathered in my parents' living room under the careful custody of an ugly piece. My parents on one side, Clara's parents on the other, and her sister, Anna, gripping the hem of her sweater like she could wring the unease out of it. The mahogany side table gleamed with a wax patience, bearing the sealed white envelope whose sharp corner had already left a small dent in the wood when I'd set it down an hour earlier and then again 10 minutes after that. The grandfather clock in the hall refused to tick. Its batteries had died 2 weeks ago, but somehow time kept stumbling forward in clumsy shoes. "Is everything okay, David?" Clara asked. The pitch of her voice rose slightly, a note too bright to be casual, as if she were trying to convince the piano it was in tune. Her smile attempted domestic tranquility, but her jaw twitched, and her shoulders dipped the way they did when guilt pressed a finger there. I looked at Leo. His eyelashes were a fringe of black silk. He blew spit bubbles and blinked like a little astronomer seeing his first constellation hung in the gallery of family faces. My mother's hand cupped the curve of his back as if holding together the spine of a story we all had believed. He gurgled, and that sweet, stupid joy shivered across the room, pleading for its life. "No," I said, and the word fell into the rug like a nail. "Everything is not okay." I took Leo from my mother, kissed his forehead, and handed him back to her with a gentleness that felt like treachery. Then I walked to the envelope, the one that hummed with a secret it was exhausted from carrying. The paper seam gave with a sigh, the tearing sounded like a zipper on a body bag. I slid out the single sheet and read the stark, sterile sentence that translated flesh and time into numbers and probabilities, and finally into a judgment. "These came in the mail this morning," I said, "and there was no benefit to kindness left, no shelter big enough to hold us all." I handed the paper to Clara. Her hands were so steady at first that I hated her for it, then they shook, trembled in waves like a bridge about to fail. The room compressed into her pupils as she skimmed and then read harder and then reread and then tried to push the words back into the fibers and then looked up at me with a drowning person's patient horror. This can't be right," she whispered. She had the voice of someone waking from a nightmare and finding the same furniture in the same places. She reached for me with her gaze first and then with her fingers, a small gesture like she could rewind us with touch. "Oh, it's right," I said. "According to these results, Leo is not my son." The syllables were unmusical, flat, efficient, like a train schedule written in winter. The silence that followed was not silence. It was the sound of every person in the room searching for a softer universe nearby and failing to find it. Clara's mother let out a gasp that tried to be quiet and failed. My father's mouth stretched thin. He stared not at me but at the envelope as if the paper were a living thing that had just bitten his boy. My mother adjusted Leo higher on her shoulder, and the motion was protective and ancient, the kind of reflex that turns even a prayer into a shield. Anna's eyes snapped to Clara with a mixture of pity and a weird, removed anger, as if she were taking inventory of damage and tallying what could not be salvaged. "Who is his father?" Clara asked, almost soundlessly. She had always been beautiful in crisis, and I wished I didn't know that. Her face went slack in a way that was oddly formal, as if she were trying to reduce the range of her expression so grief wouldn't have anything to climb. "That," I said, "is a question you're going to answer." It came out flat. I wanted thunder. I wanted the righteous, cinematic rage of a man wronged, but the room absorbed my anger like a field absorbing rain. The flood remained invisible until the ground gave. "I didn't mean to," she said, already crying now, tapping into that old union of tears and apology. "It just happened." She sobbed once, a little hiccup that made Leo twitch, and my mother rubbed circles on his back to soothe him like a negotiation. "It just happened," I repeated, and there it was, the friction, the ignition. "A baby, Clara, multiple months, choices, lies. You brought another man's child into my home, into my bones, and you called him ours." The word ours was a counterfeit coin that had been in circulation for too long. "Pack your things," I said. The room widened and narrowed in the same instant. "You're leaving." Her head jerked as if someone had snapped a string. "Where am I supposed to go?" She was reaching out for practicality now, trying to find the polite edges while standing barefoot on shards. I don't care where you go, I said, and I surprised myself with how cold it sounded. And take him with you. I nodded toward Leo, then looked at the ceiling, as if the plaster could grant me a nobler face than the one I was wearing. He's just a baby, she said. It was both a protest and a prayer, like a parent saying a child's name in a storm. He's not my baby, I said. He's the product of your betrayal. The sentence felt borrowed from some lesser man, the kind who can't tell the difference between punishing a lover and punishing a child. But I carried it because it allowed me to stand. My mother's eyes burned holes through me, my father looked away. Clara's father seemed to wilt, her mother's lips trembled with grief that had nowhere to sit down. Anna stepped forward, then stopped, as if remembering a boundary line drawn in chalk. Clara buckled Leo into the carrier with hands that kept missing buckles. The door opened, the door closed. The house inhaled a new emptiness and held it with the lungs of a cathedral. I grabbed my keys. The metal was warm, as if they'd been waiting for me to choose violence. I drove to the gym where he lifted and laughed and spotted his friends, the man whose shadow had crept across my marriage and then laid down in it. I found him by the racks, his smile a careless thing, and the world narrowed to the distance between my fist and his teeth. The rest happened like a bad rehearsal of a worse play. Shouts, blood blooming too bright, hands that were mine and not mine, the sudden shape of a future in handcuffs. Then the police station, fluorescent bulbs that made skin look like lies, and the quiet admission. Guilty because there was no useful fiction left to tell. Somewhere in that blur, news spread like ash over everything. Clara became a pariah. The man his life buckled, promises cracking like ice under boots. In the rented echo of my cell, I dreamed of Leo's eyelashes and woke with my palms aching like they held onto a ledge that wasn't there. The law took its portion, shame took more. But grief collected daily interest, and when the sentence ended, a heavier trial began, the one where forgiveness and self-respect couldn't both live under the same roof. The day I got out, the sky was a raw, indifferent blue, and the air smelled like metal and sun-baked dust. Freedom is a strange room. The door opens out, but the furniture is nailed to the floor. I walked past the chain-link fence and the razor-wire haircut of the horizon and felt like I had borrowed my own body. My father's truck idled at the curb. He didn't get out, he didn't wave. He just nodded once like a fisherman acknowledging weather. The ride home was a collection of small noises. Tires murmuring, his thumb tapping against the steering wheel, a plastic grocery bag whispering in the back with the things my mother had packed, sandwiches wrapped tight as secrets, a bottle of water, a folded shirt that smelled like lemon detergent, and a memory where no one had lied. Neither of us said Leo's name. Neither of us said Clara's. We talked about the roof needing attention, about a neighbor's dog that howled through storms, about how time had gotten weird during the last baseball season. Men's words to keep their faces intact. I slept in my old room. The posters were gone, but a square of paint was brighter where one had been, like the house remembered my teenage lungs. I woke to my mother's knuckles on the door, her voice thin with carefulness. Breakfast. She had always made pancakes on good days and bad days alike, as if normalcy itself were a food group. We ate slowly. She tried to find a question that wouldn't detonate. I tried to hand her answers that didn't bleed. That afternoon, the town proved it remembered me. A woman at the pharmacy glanced at the floor when I walked in. A barista called out an order and skipped eye contact. People were kind like surgeons, precise, distant, dealing with damage but not making it personal. An older man clapped my shoulder and said, "We all make mistakes." I nodded because it was the price of living here, because there was nothing to be gained by telling him that some mistakes aren't mistakes at all but the fruits of choices we chose not to name. I didn't look for Clara. The rumor map changed hourly anyway. Some said she had moved 2 towns over to live with a cousin. Some said she was sleeping in her sister's spare room. Some said she'd gone back to her parents and haunted their guest bed like a fever. I knew only this: exile comes in many sizes, and she was wearing one that didn't fit. The first night, I dreamed of the living room again. Not the fight, not the gym, not the envelope, just the moment my mother handed Leo back to Clara. In the dream, he turned his face to me and smiled with both gums out, a seal of joy on a paper I had already shredded. I woke with my heart banging like it wanted out. I went for a run through streets that had memorized my childhood footsteps. The morning smelled like wet grass and bakery sugar. My breath made ghosts in cool air, and I thought, I have to find a way to be a man again that doesn't require someone else's suffering. Work saved me from the worst of my own weather. A contractor friend took me on for demolition and rebuilds. I learned the patience of studs and levels again, the mercy of clean lines, the soft click when a board seats correctly. There's a holiness to removing what can't hold weight and replacing it with something that can. Every nail sunk was a confession. Every plank level was a vow to do less harm. A week into the new job, I saw Anna in the grocery store. She stood by the nectarines, thumb pressing into soft fruit, testing for ripeness like the world had not ended in a living room 16 miles from there. She saw me and went still. For a moment, we pretended we were strangers. Then she put the fruit down and walked over with a courage I envied. "David," she said, "not Mr. Nothing, not ex-brother-in-law, not the man who broke a jaw, just the name that meant once upon a time." Anna, I looked at the tile floor at our mirrored shoes. How is she? The question leapt without permission like a dog that still knows its owner. Not good, she said. She keeps trying to hold the world together with apologies. They don't stick. She looked at me then, really looked, and the anger in her eyes surprised us both. You shouldn't have done what you did. I know, I said. The admission landed between us like a dropped plate. She was wrong, Anna said, her voice a thin bridge, but he's just a baby. I know, I said again, and the words were useless knuckles knocking on a locked door. We stood there, two people chewing on grief, until the store radio switched songs and reminded us that time was still boss. She left with a bag of fruit. I left with bread and the ache of understanding that morality is rarely a single chair, it's a table full of uncomfortable seats. The next turning came on a job site. We were stripping a kitchen down to studs when I found, behind a cabinet, an old growth ring in the wood that looked like a thumbprint. The house had kept a secret history, 2 layers of paint, bad decisions, good intentions, compromises made in a hurry. I traced the ring with a knuckle. A thought came that felt like blasphemy. I could love a child not mine by blood. The thought slid through me and lodged somewhere bright and unnameable. That night I wrote a letter to Clara and did not send it. It said, I am not asking to be in his life, and I am not pretending it would be simple if I tried. I am only saying that a boy deserves to be wanted, and somewhere in the debris, I can find the part of myself that once wanted him without question. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer like a seed with no rain in the forecast. The next day the past found me anyway. A text from an unknown number. It's me. Anna gave me your number. I know I don't deserve anything from you. But Leo's sick. He has a fever we can't break. I'm at county. I'm scared. I was out the door before the fear finished spelling my name. The sliding ER doors opened like a confession booth, and somewhere inside was a child I'd disowned and a woman whose face I still knew blindfolded. County smelled like antiseptic and the wet coin scent of recycled air. The waiting room chairs were stacked in rows, ugly as a bad decision, and a television mounted in the corner tried to convince everyone the world was light enough to float. Mothers with toddlers, a man holding his side with a towel, an elderly couple whispering syllables into one long prayer, pain assembled in order, waiting its turn like taxes. I found her by the vending machines, arms wrapped around herself like a tourniquet. Clara's hair was pulled into a loose knot that made her look younger. Her eyes were swollen into their oldest age. She saw me and startled, as if she'd conjured me by accident and didn't know how to send me back. He's in there, she said. They're checking him for RSV or pneumonia or I don't know. He's hot all over and so quiet. The words came out like pennies spilled from a ripped pocket, clattering, rolling, some lost under the machine. I'll sit with you, I said. It surprised me how easy it was to mean it. My body remembered some gentleness that my mind had exiled. We sat. The machine hummed. A nurse called names that weren't his. Time disassembled itself and reassembled into heaps. How did you know where to reach me? I asked finally, because small questions are sometimes life rafts. Anna, she said, rubbing the back of her hand with the thumb of the other as if she were washing invisible ink. She saw you. She thought maybe you'd come. I came, I said. It was the smallest possible confession and still tasted like iron. A doctor came through the doors then, face arranged into that careful blandness that means no one is falling apart yet. We stood. He's responding, she said. High fever, but lungs sound better than we feared. We're going to keep him for observation. Can I see him? Clara asked, and the question tilted in the direction of prayer again. 2 at a time, the doctor said, motioning down the hall. In the dim pediatric bay, the machines made a music of warnings and reassurance. Leo lay on his back, cheeks flushed, hair damp against his forehead like he'd been pulled from a gentle river. His eyelashes were damp stars. He turned his head at the sound of our shoes and made a small noise, not quite a cry, not quite a greeting. Something in my chest unclenched and then clenched again, but in a different place. Clara's fingers hovered over his blanket, then tucked it more snugly around his belly with ritual precision. She whispered, Mama's here, and then, after a beat softer like a theft from an old world, we're here. May I? The words got lost in traffic on my tongue. She nodded. I stepped closer and put 2 fingers against his wrist, counting silently, a useless exercise to convince my hands they had purpose. His skin was a little too hot, and still he felt like innocence carved into breath. I had been cruel in a living room, I had been destructive at a gym. But this was the part of me that had survived both, the capacity to soften in the presence of helplessness. Is he okay? I asked the nurse as she checked the IV. He will be, she said in the tone nurses use to glue parents together. He's tough, babies are tougher than they look. So are you, usually. She smiled in a way that suggested she didn't need the backstory to recognize the weather. When we stepped back into the hall, Clara leaned against the wall and slid down to a crouch. Her shoulders shook not with sobs but with a quieter storm, a tremor that lives in the body after too many alarms. I crouched with her because there was nothing else to do. I was going to tell you, she said, staring at the scuffed linoleum like it held a kinder timeline. I was going to tell you before he was born, but every day I didn't, it got harder to choose the true day. And then he came, and he looked like you when you were asleep, and I thought maybe the world would consent to my wish. Who is his father? I asked, and the question sounded different now, less like a verdict and more like we were both on the same side of a locked door. She swallowed. Ethan, she said. The name hit the wall with a soft sound like a thrown sock. From your gym. I know, I said. The old heat moved through me, then left a space it had once occupied like a house burned to its foundation. I made my worst choice there. She nodded. He left town after it all. He texted me a few times saying he'd send money, then vanished. I told myself I preferred the empty space to a person shaped like a debt. We both stared at the floor until a janitor's cart rattled by and broke the trance. What now? She asked finally, and the two words contained more multitudes than any speech. I don't know, I said, but I know this. I don't want to be the man who used anger as proof he once loved. I don't want to be the man who punishes a child to make pain add up. The sentences were stones placed in a river, testing if there was a way across. I'm sorry, she said, and it wasn't an attempt at repair, just a lit candle in a ruined church. Me too, I said. We took turns dozing in plastic chairs. Morning came slow like courage. The doctor signed the discharge papers with a flourish that felt like mercy. We wheeled Leo out into a pale sun. At the curb, she turned to me. Do you want to hold him? Her voice was careful, offering not just weight but a paradox. I took him. He made a sound like a remembered joke, then rested his warm face against my neck as if something in him recognized something in me that no test could quantify. The hospital bracelet clicked off his wrist that afternoon, and with it went our last excuse for not deciding who we needed to become next. Forgiveness is never declared. It is practiced like scales, clumsy at first, then gradually less wrong. The first practice was a grocery run where I saw Clara compare prices with a concentrational ferocity that would have impressed any accountant. The second was a park bench where I held Leo while she wiped his nose and told me about his new habit of laughing at ceiling fans as if they were stand-up comics. The third was a lawyer's office where I sat across from a woman with sharp glasses and asked questions I'd once sworn I'd never have cause to ask. I'm not his biological father, I said. The words no longer burned. They cooled into a fact that had stopped fighting, but I loved him, I might still. Custody is a matter of best interests, the lawyer said, not just biology. She tapped a pen against a pad like she was playing a metronome for my patience. But be clear with yourself about what you want. Legal rights come with responsibilities that aren't seasonal. What did I want? The question rang through weeks. I wanted a life that didn't collapse at the sight of a stroller. I wanted my parents to sit through a holiday meal without scanning for landmines. I wanted to look at Clara and see not the worst day of my life, but the complicated person who stood on that day. I wanted the gym to become a place where bodies grew strong rather than where a man shrank himself into violence. And I wanted to teach a small boy how to clap on the 2 and 4. Clara found part-time work at a cafe that smelled like butter and good news. She wore a black apron and carried plates with a grace that seemed borrowed from a world where she'd never learned to lie. Some afternoons when my shift ended early, I'd stop by. She would slide a muffin my way and I would pretend to be surprised, and we would rehearse the script of amicability until it acquired a lived-in comfort. I've started going to therapy, she said one day, like someone confessing to a diet. I want to stop choosing the wrong day to tell the truth. Good, I said and meant it. I'd started anger management, accountability work, even a group where men said out loud the part where we become our own bad weather and then blame the storm. The first time I watched Leo alone for an hour while Clara ran an errand, the house hummed with anxious appliances. He banged a wooden spoon against a pot and declared it art. He pointed at the ceiling fan and laughed like an old friend had entered the room upside down. When he napped, I stood over his crib with the tenderness of a sentry guarding a flag. The air smelled like talc and Cheerio dust and the faint sour of spilled milk. He slept with his mouth a little open, a tiny O of trust. When Clara returned, she hesitated in the doorway as if the threshold itself had become a question. How was he? A tyrant, I said, and we both smiled with the relief of people who have found a non-lethal language. We built small rituals. Thursdays were library days, Saturdays the park. Sundays silence, a new kind of Sabbath where we let our better selves catch up. Once, as we crossed a street, a car slowed and a woman stared, her mouth set in the line that means she knows the whole story or thinks she does. I felt shame bloom and then wither like a flower and fast forward. I squeezed the stroller handle until the foam groaned. Then I exhaled and decided the story belonged to us. I wrote another letter, this one to Ethan, I said. You left a child the way some men leave towns, with a shrug. I am not owed your help, but he is owed your name in the file of the world. Come sign the papers that give him someone better than a ghost. I mailed it to the last address I had, aware that wishing on a burnt star is not strategy. Weeks passed. No reply. The hole where a father might have stood grew a scaffolding instead. I took measurements for a toddler bed I planned to build. I invented a game where the floor was lava and the ottoman was a ship. I repeated the sentence out loud when alone. He is not my son and I love him anyway. Each time the words fit a little more. Then the next bomb. A manila envelope, registered mail, Ethan's name on the return, inside a waiver. He had signed away any claim, any involvement, any obligation. A note on a sheet from a motel notepad, do what you want, I'm out. Clara read it in my kitchen. She set it down carefully like it might detonate if jostled. He's gone, she said. He's gone, I echoed and felt the sourness of relief. Sometimes absence is a gift wrapped in ugliest paper. We took the papers to the lawyer. The path cleared incrementally: forms, background checks, home assessments. My mother baked cookies for the social worker. My father painted the trim in the nursery because it would occupy his hands. We weren't pretending biology didn't matter. We were deciding that love did. On a soft rain day, standing in a county office with fluorescent lights humming like bees, a judge with a tired kindness read names like incantations and then said the sentence that changed the shape of our lives. Petition for legal guardianship granted. The stamp hit the page with a satisfying thump. Leo squealed at the sound like he'd won a prize. In a way he had, so had we all. Guardianship stabilized the floor beneath us. What remained was the harder architecture, the choice to rebuild a marriage not out of amnesia but out of truth that could bear weight. The night after the judge signed, the house felt like a boat that had stopped taking on water. Clara sat at the table while Leo threw peas like tiny comets. I watched her fingers on the fork, how they held, how they trembled, how they steadied. She looked up and met my eyes with the expression of a woman who had learned that love can be both shelter and storm. We can't go back, she said. I know, I said. Do you still love me? The question did not demand romance. It asked whether I had room for the human she had revealed. I love the part of you that brings blankets and the part that tells the truth late and the part that learns to tell it earlier next time, I said. I don't love the part that lied. I don't love the part that wanted to be rescued by a delusion. I can live with a person who has those parts if those parts know they're not driving. She laughed, a small shocked sound, then cried into it, then wiped her face with the heel of her hand. I can work with that, she said. We did not relight old fires. We built new ones, date nights that were really apology practice masquerading as tacos. Walks where we named the monsters we invited into our home and then measured them for smaller clothes. Therapy where we learned to fight without packing for war. Church sometimes, not because we were devout, but because sitting in a room where everyone agreed to be quiet felt like a muscle we needed to strengthen. My parents adjusted slowly. My mother, who had been a lion over her cub in that living room, softened into a grandmother who carried snacks like passports. My father taught Leo how to hammer nails into a scrap board without hitting his thumb, and when he did hit his thumb, how to say dang instead of the other word. We were building not a replacement for what had cracked, but a different thing entirely, a structure that acknowledged its repairs in the light. Then came the invitation to a family gathering at Clara's parents' house, the same house where the floral sofa had hosted our undoing. We arrived with a salad and a truce. The air smelled like garlic and caution. Her parents hugged us like people who had learned that hugging is a bridge and sometimes bridges shake but still hold. Anna tugged Leo to the backyard and taught him how to blow bubbles with a seriousness that made him giggle meanly at failure and then clap at success. Midway through dessert, Clara's father cleared his throat. I owe a few words, he said, and the table stilled into attention. I judged you, David. I judged you for what you did in anger, and I judged you worse for what you said about the boy. I didn't see the trap we were all in. I didn't see that you were drowning too. He raised his glass, to choosing the harder right. I felt something old and hard unclench under my ribs. Clara slid her foot against mine under the table, a quiet semaphore. That night after we put Leo down in his room, our room for him, with the toddler bed and the mobile that he pretended he was too old to love, we stood in the hall. The air between us felt like a question again, but this time it was a good one. Marry me again, I said before I had decided to say it. The words were reckless and perfect. Not because we got lost, but because we learned the map. She covered her mouth and then she nodded, and then she kissed me with a softness that didn't try to erase anything. Yes, she said into my mouth. We had a small ceremony in the backyard with string lights and pies instead of cake. Anna cried like a faucet with a dignity problem. My father wore a tie that had resisted every attempt to be straight for 20 years. My mother read a poem about repair. And Leo, in suspenders that made him look like a tiny professor, shoved 2 fingers into a blueberry pie and then into my mouth and then into Clara's, and the photos looked like joy stealing a base. We danced slow under the soft electricity and promised to tell the truth when it was still small enough to carry. Later, when the house had gone quiet, we lay awake listening to our boys breathing on the baby monitor as if it were a new kind of music. Peace arrived like a guest who knows not to overstay. The world would test our vows soon enough, and the test would come wearing a familiar last name. Ethan returned in late summer with the heat that makes asphalt breathe. He texted from a new number, in town, want to talk. The words didn't tremble, they were utilitarian, like a man asking to borrow a ladder. I stared at the screen until the past and present overlapped like two transparencies on a projector. We met at a public park where families fed ducks stale bread and teenagers pretended to be older. He looked smaller, as if his choices had eaten muscle from the inside. When he saw me, he did not square his shoulders. He kept them humble. "I got your letter," he said. "Late." He shrugged like the mail had been a conspiracy. "I signed what you wanted." "I didn't want anything," I said, and the heat made my tone feel like a mirage. "He did." He nodded, then looked at the pond, at a goose bullying smaller birds into a half-moon of fear. "I came to say sorry," he said, and it sounded like he had never practiced the sentence in his life. "And two, to see him from far away. I won't interfere, I needed to see that he exists." "From far away," I said. "We set the distance with our bodies first, two men separated by a bench, by a history, by a child neither of us owned fully." Clara arrived with Leo. She had the cautious calm of a firefighter doing a controlled burn. Leo spotted the ducks and squealed and did not notice the plot twist. We walked to the edge of the pond and pretended for a few minutes that the world honored our small fictions. Then Ethan saw his son and made a sound like a man discovering water in the desert. He didn't reach for him, he didn't say, "My boy." He just looked until the looking hurt, and then he looked more. "He's beautiful," he said. "Thank you," Clara said, and the words were civil and strange, like neighbors exchanging pleasantries under police tape. "I'm leaving again," he said. "Jobs out west, cleaner slate, I won't be a problem." He turned to me. "I know you hate me." "I don't," I said, and discovered I meant it. "I don't have the space." He nodded like I had given him a water bottle on a hot day. "Take care of him," he said, and the pronoun did not carry an argument. "We will," I said. He left. The geese reasserted dominance over the pond. A child nearby dropped a snow cone and began to cry like tragedy had finally found him. We stood in the heat and let the future rearrange itself. That night I carried Leo to bed. He wrapped his arms around my neck with a ferocity that made me laugh and then almost cry. I laid him down and traced the edge of his ear with a fingertip, the way my mother used to do to me. Clara leaned on the doorframe and watched us and then came to stand beside me, and for once we didn't speak because nothing we could say would be as honest as the room. In the morning, the house smelled like coffee and toast and stability. I opened the back door to let in the day. The garden we had tried and failed to keep alive was making a heroic, slightly pathetic comeback, some tomatoes attempting red, a basil plant insisting on joy. Leo toddled out and went after a ladybug with diplomatic exuberance. Clara put her hand in mine. "Do you ever think about the living room?" she asked. "Every day," I said. "But it's different now." "No, it's not the place where we ended," I said. "It's the place where we refuse to live inside a lie anymore. We were cruel there and honest there, and neither cancels the other. We built this," I gestured at the morning, at the small boy at the basil, "because we decided to let truth cost what it costs." She nodded and pressed her forehead to my shoulder. We stood there while the day negotiated with the sun. Later at church, the quiet kind, we lit a candle, not for penance, not for show, but because flame teaches. It eats and illuminates at the same time. I thought about vows in the language of carpentry, plumb, level, square. I thought about the envelope and how it did not own us anymore. I thought about anger as a bridge we had walked across and left behind. On the drive home, Leo slept with his mouth open again, the old little O of trust. At a red light, I looked at him in the rearview mirror and said a sentence I had practiced until it was true. "I am your father." Not because a lab said so, because a life said so. We turned onto our street. The basil decided astonishingly to be fragrant. The house stood upright, and the silence that followed was not the silence of shock, but the silence of a story that had learned to breathe. Not the silence of shock, but the silence of a story that had learned to breathe.